Corrections officials are expressing increasing concerns about whom the Iowa Board of Parole is letting out of prison.
That includes one man paroled about 10 times who is now accused of kidnapping and killing a 10-year-old girl. KCRG TV9's Ethan Stein is here with that story as part of our ongoing series, Released Too Soon. Ethan?
Beth, Jim, Henry Dinkins is accused of kidnapping and killing 10-year-old Breasia Terrell in July 2020. He had been released from prison early on parole several times, including just months before the murder. And then there's this man, Jovan Ellis Jr., who was convicted of robbing a Kennedy High School student at gunpoint, his second such crime. He also received parole, and months later, police arrested him for a nearly identical crime. It's an example of several cases where we found where correction officials and crime victims are questioning how these criminals get released from prison on parole.
This one was my favorite. I love the dresses.
Each photo is a reminder to Lauren Stengel.
I loved art classes. They were always my favorite.
Her high school is home to mostly happy memories, but she remembers the parking lot for a different reason.
I remember pretty much everything that happened that day.
On that day, Jovan Ellis Jr. robbed her at gunpoint. Video captured Ellis shove Stengel into her vehicle and take her cell phone. Ellis was on pretrial release for a similar robbery at the time. Stengel says the attack put her in therapy and left her with panic attacks.
I became, and still kind of am, kind of obsessed with making sure all the doors are locked.
Ellis was sentenced to 15 years. A judge denied to lower the sentence twice, but the Iowa Board of Parole granted him parole around 2 years later. A few months after, Coralville police arrested him for robbing 2 people at gunpoint in a hotel. He's awaiting trial on those charges. Emails the I-9 investigative team received show officials in community-based corrections, the people who oversee parole, are concerned dangerous people are leaving prison too early. One director complained it appears that nobody needs to remain incarcerated, after he said the parole board tried to release an arson suspect. Another said a shooter at the pedestrian mall in Iowa City was almost released on parole, calling it very concerning for public safety. And yet another questioned the release of a repeat OWI offender, weeks into a 5-year sentence. That man was Henry Dinkins, now accused of kidnapping and murdering 10-year-old Breasia Terrell.
A mistake that cost me, my daughter's life, that I never get over.
Breasia Terrell's mother spent more than 8 months searching for her daughter. Records show Dinkins, who was a registered sex offender, received parole about 10 separate times, most recently for a habitual OWI offense in 2020. 3 months later, police say he kidnapped and killed Terrell. By law, the Iowa Board of Parole reviews thousands of cases each year. Iowa Code states the board should grant parole when, in its opinion, there is a reasonable probability that the person can be released without detriment to the community or the person. Code lists several factors to consider, but there is no mandatory standards to meet. One factor not listed by the law is also considered: keeping prison populations down. Board minutes we received from a public records request shows it's a stated goal for the former board chair, and he also met with the Department of Corrections to discuss ways to lower the population in Iowa's overcrowded prisons.
It's subjective. It's up to the parole board to make those decisions.
Suthi Kukalera studies parole boards at Sam Houston State University. She says most parole decisions, like the ones in Iowa, are simply board members' opinions. She says the lack of requirements for parole can also create arbitrary decisions.
Based along socioeconomic status, or perhaps even deferring release rates based on what the individual was sentenced for.
And this is my school.
Stengel still looks back on high school as a positive experience, even though it gave her a moment she'll never forget.
Just it kind of changed how I see things differently now.
We've reached out to the Department of Corrections, the Board of Parole, and the Governor's Office, who oversees both agencies. All declined an on-camera interview. In a statement to TV9, the Board of Parole Chair, Nick Davis, said the board makes the best decision it can with the information available to it. We are always devastated to learn when someone who has been released commits a horrific offense. He went on to say, we very much regret that there will be cases that are misjudged, and we are constantly working to improve our process and procedures. One factor the Department of Corrections and the Board of Parole look at is an inmate's risk evaluation score. Iowa Code specifically states those scores are a public record, but when we asked for those scores, the governor's office denied that request, claiming it is exempt under a separate law regarding department evaluations. In studio, Ethan Stein, KCRG TV9 News.
All right, thank you, Ethan. Now, this is the latest segment in our Release Too Soon series. We've also detailed a sex offender released from prison by mistake and a lawsuit claiming the parole board made some decisions illegally. To see our series, head to the KCRG TV9 YouTube channel and search Released Too Soon.